Movement between the United States and Canada has always been steady, quiet, and rarely dramatic. The two countries share language, infrastructure, media, and economic ties that blur the emotional weight of crossing the border. Yet in recent months, a subtle reversal has taken shape. Americans who once viewed Canada as a extension of familiar life have begun to reassess that assumption. Departures are not driven by crisis or spectacle, but by a slow realization that similarity does not guarantee comfort. Initial expectations are often shaped by proximity. Canada appears orderly, measured, and socially restrained in ways that contrast with the intensity of American life. For many Americans, arrival brings relief. Streets feel quieter. Public interactions feel less confrontational. Institutions seem stable, predictable, and procedural rather than performative. The absence of constant urgency creates an impression of balance. Life appears to move at a manageable pace, free from the relentless self-promotion and visible competition common in the United States. Over time, however, this calm reveals a different texture. The emotional temperature remains low, even during moments that would typically invite intensity or affirmation. Professional environments emphasize caution over ambition. Social interactions prioritize respect over enthusiasm. Success is acknowledged discreetly, if at all. For Americans accustomed to feedback loops, validation, critique, recognition, this neutrality can feel disorienting. Progress becomes harder to measure, not because it is absent, but because it is rarely signaled. Daily routines reinforce this pattern. Conversations avoid extremes. Opinions are softened before they are expressed. Disagreement is handled indirectly, often postponed or diluted. While this creates social harmony, it also reduces emotional clarity. Americans may struggle to interpret where they stand, professionally or socially. The absence of friction minimizes conflict, but it also removes momentum. Decisions take longer. Change unfolds incrementally. Initiative is often filtered through collective comfort rather than individual drive. Economic realities intensify this shift. While Canada offers stability, its systems reward patience more than acceleration. Career advancement follows structured pathways with limited deviation. Housing markets, healthcare access, and professional licensing are governed by layered regulations that emphasize fairness over speed. Americans who expect adaptability may experience these systems as rigid. What initially feels protective gradually feels restrictive, especially for those used to navigating ambiguity through personal leverage. Social belonging evolves similarly. Friendships form slowly and deepen quietly, but rarely expand outward. Networks remain contained, often built over years rather than opportunities. Americans may sense politeness without intimacy, inclusion without closeness. Invitations are infrequent, boundaries subtle but firm. The social landscape is not unwelcoming, but it is carefully maintained, resistant to rapid integration. As months pass, the contrast becomes less about difference and more about alignment. The question shifts from whether life is easier to whether it feels responsive. Many Americans begin to recognize that the same features that once offered relief, calm, restraint, predictability, also limit expression, urgency, and personal recalibration. This realization does not arrive suddenly, but accumulates quietly, shaping decisions that are rarely announced and often misunderstood. This tension often surfaces in subtle, everyday moments rather than dramatic turning points. Workplace meetings conclude without clear direction. Feedback arrives cautiously phrased, sometimes delayed, sometimes absent. Initiative is neither discouraged nor celebrated. It is simply absorbed into the system. For Americans raised in environments where motion itself signals value, this neutrality can erode motivation. Effort continues, but the emotional return diminishes. The broader social climate reinforces this restraint. Public spaces are orderly, but emotionally distant. Interactions remain courteous, efficient, and brief. Small talk functions as social lubrication rather than connection. Depth is reserved for established relationships, and even then expressed with moderation. Americans may interpret this as emotional reserve or disengagement, while Canadians often understand it as respect for personal boundaries. The mismatch lies not in intention, but in expectation. Time plays a critical role in this adjustment. In Canada, trust is built through consistency rather than intensity. Reliability outweighs charisma. Showing up repeatedly matters more than standing out once. For Americans accustomed to faster cycles of recognition and reinvention, this rhythm can feel slow, even static. Personal identity begins to flatten, shaped less by aspiration and more by accommodation. The emotional landscape adapts accordingly. Life feels safer, but narrower. Anxiety decreases, yet so does stimulation. The absence of constant evaluation brings relief, but also a sense of invisibility. Without friction, growth becomes harder to perceive. Many Americans describe a quiet disconnection not from people, but from momentum. Days blend together, defined by routine rather than progression. Structural factors deepen this experience. Immigration systems, professional accreditation, and healthcare access operate with deliberate caution. Each step requires documentation, waiting periods, and procedural alignment. While these systems aim for equity, they leave little room for improvisation. Americans used to navigating systems through speed, negotiation, or exception encounter firm boundaries. Adaptation demands patience, not persuasion. Even leisure reflects this cultural calibration. Social gatherings are planned, predictable, and contained. Spontaneity is limited. Risk is minimized. The emphasis is on sustainability rather than expansion. Over time, Americans may feel that life is being managed rather than explored. Comfort becomes consistent, but inspiration rare. This cumulative effect reshapes perception. Canada no longer feels like a quieter version of home, but a fundamentally different emotional ecosystem. The decision to leave is rarely framed as dissatisfaction. Instead, it emerges as a recalibration, a recognition that stability alone does not fulfill everyone. For some Americans, the need for movement, visibility, and emotional responsiveness gradually outweighs the benefits of calm. Eventually, the contrast clarifies into something more precise. The departure of Americans from Canada is not a rejection of the country itself, but an acknowledgement of misalignment. Canada offers continuity, restraint, and institutional reliability. The United States, by contrast, remains structured around responsiveness, faster feedback, sharper emotional signals, and a cultural tolerance for visible friction. Neither system is inherently superior, but they reward different psychological needs. For many Americans, the longer they remain in Canada, the more they notice how identity is shaped by environment. Ambition softens. Self-definition becomes quieter. Emotional expression narrows into acceptable ranges. This transformation is subtle and gradual, often mistaken for maturity or balance. Yet beneath the surface, a sense of compression can emerge. The self feels contained rather than expanded. What once felt like peace begins to resemble emotional neutrality. The lowered intensity that initially provided relief starts to blur meaning. Without contrast, achievement loses definition. Without urgency, purpose diffuses. Life becomes steady, but less legible. Canadians often value this equilibrium, seeing it as a safeguard against burnout and instability. Americans, however, are more likely to associate meaning with motion even when that motion is exhausting. The decision to leave is therefore rarely impulsive. It unfolds quietly, shaped by months or years of lived experience. Americans do not exit Canada because life is difficult, but because it is too even, too regulated, too careful. The systems function, the social order holds, and the days remain predictable. Yet for some, predictability itself becomes a constraint. Returning south does not necessarily mean returning to comfort. The United States remains louder, harsher, and more volatile, but it is also more emotionally legible. Feedback is immediate. Effort is visible. Risk is rewarded as often as it is punished. For Americans who recalibrate after time in Canada, this intensity feels familiar rather than overwhelming. In this sense, the movement back is less about geography and more about emotional orientation. Canada teaches restraint, patience, and continuity. America reasserts urgency, expression, and individual momentum. The real reason Americans are leaving Canada this year is not policy, weather, or economics alone. It is the quiet realization that cultural calm, while stabilizing, does not sustain every temperament indefinitely.